The dust motes danced in the single shaft of moonlight, piercing the attic's gloom, illuminating a scene that felt ripped from a forgotten nightmare. Elias clutched the antique lantern, its flickering flame casting long, shifting shadows that seemed to breathe with malevolent intent. He hadn't wanted to come up here. His grandmother, God rest her soul, had always kept this part of the old farmhouse locked, speaking of things best left undisturbed. Now with her gone, and the bank breathing down his neck, Elias had no choice but to clear it out, hoping to find some forgotten trinket of value. The air was thick with the scent of aged wood, forgotten memories, and something else, something metallic, faintly sweet, like old blood. Cobwebs, thick as shrouds, draped every surface, shimmering like gossamer in the lantern's weak glow. Elias coughed, waving a hand in front of his face, trying to dispel the suffocating feeling. He'd expected old furniture, maybe some dusty boxes of clothes, but this was different. In the center of the room, beneath a tarpaulin stained with what looked suspiciously like rust, sat an object that made the hairs on Elias's arms stand on end. It wasn't furniture. It was too large, too irregular. With a hesitant pull, he tugged the stiff canvas away, revealing a wooden crate, roughly 6 feet long and 3 feet wide. No markings, no labels, just raw, dark wood bound with thick, tarnished iron bands. It looked less like something stored and more like something interred. A chill, deeper than the attic's inherent dampness, settled into Elias's bones. He ran a gloved hand over the rough-hewn timber. It felt cold even in the stuffy air. His grandmother's words echoed in his mind, "Some things are better left undisturbed." But curiosity, a dangerous and compelling force, gnawed at him. He needed to know what was inside. He needed the money. He found an old crowbar near the entrance to the attic, caked in rust but still sturdy. With a grunt, he wedged it under the lid of the crate. The wood groaned, a sound that seemed to reverberate through the very foundations of the house. He pried again, harder this time. A splintering crack echoed through the silent attic, and the lid lurched upwards. A wave of frigid air, smelling of decay and something indefinably wrong, washed over him. Elias recoiled, stumbling back against a stack of forgotten trunks. He held the lantern high, peering into the darkness within the crate. It wasn't empty. Wrapped in layers of yellowed, brittle canvas was a figure. Not human, not exactly. It was too long, too slender. As his eyes adjusted, Elias saw details that made his stomach clench. It was a doll, a truly terrifying doll. It stood nearly 5 feet tall, its limbs unnaturally elongated and jointed. Its body was carved from dark, polished wood, almost black, and adorned with intricate, disturbing carvings that Elias couldn't quite decipher in the dim light. Its head, disproportionately small, was a pale, porcelain-like material, unblemished save for 2 unsettlingly realistic eyes. They weren't glass or painted. They were irises, a vivid, almost glowing emerald green, set in whites that seemed to shimmer with an internal light. They stared directly at him, unblinking, unnervingly alive. Its mouth, a thin, painted line, was stretched into a perpetual, chilling smile. It wore tattered, antique clothing, a miniature, faded Victorian dress, dark and heavy, with lace cuffs that had long since rotted away. One bony wooden hand was clasped over its chest, while the other, long-fingered and delicate, rested on its thigh. Its feet were bare, carved with grotesque, gnarled toes. Elias's breath hitched. This wasn't some child's plaything. This was an artifact, a relic of forgotten horrors. As he stared, a strange sensation crept over him, a prickling on his skin, like tiny insects crawling beneath his shirt. The air in the attic grew heavy, pressing down on him. The emerald eyes of the doll seemed to deepen, to draw him in. He felt a sudden, irrational urge to reach out, to touch its cold wooden skin. He shook his head violently, trying to break the spell. This was just a doll, an old creepy doll, nothing more. He could sell it. Antiques Roadshow had shown stranger things. He tried to lift it. It was surprisingly heavy, far heavier than its slender frame suggested. Its weight seemed to resist him, as if rooted to the spot. Elias grunted, pulling harder. As he did, he heard it, a faint, almost imperceptible creak. Not the wood of the crate, not the old house settling. It was the sound of a limb shifting. He froze, his heart hammering against his ribs. He looked down at the doll. Its head, which had been perfectly straight moments before, was now tilted slightly to the side, its emerald eyes fixed on him with an unnerving curiosity. "No," Elias whispered, a cold sweat breaking out on his forehead. "No, that's impossible." He backed away slowly, his eyes glued to the doll. He imagined it moving, slowly rising from the crate, its long spindly limbs unfolding. He imagined its painted smile widening, stretching impossibly. His mind screamed at him to run, to leave it, to lock the attic and never look back. But his feet felt glued to the dusty floorboards. The lantern flickered, dimming dangerously. A sudden gust of wind, though the attic windows were sealed shut, swept through the room, stirring the cobwebs into a frenzied dance. The air grew colder, the scent of decay more potent, sickly sweet. Then he heard it again, a whisper faint and dry like dead leaves skittering across pavement. It seemed to come from the doll, from the very air around it. It wasn't a language he knew, but the tone was unmistakable. It was a summons. Elias finally broke free of the paralysis. He turned and stumbled towards the attic door, fumbling with the latch. His hands trembled, his fingers clumsy. He could feel the doll's eyes on his back, burning into him. He didn't dare look over his shoulder. He burst out of the attic, scrambling down the narrow, creaking stairs, the sound of his own ragged breathing deafening in his ears. He slammed the attic door shut, the old lock rattling loudly as he twisted the key. He then grabbed a heavy, rusty padlock he'd found in the shed and fastened it through the latch, securing it with shaking hands. He leaned against the door, gasping, trying to calm his racing heart. It was just an old house, just an old doll. He was tired, stressed. His mind was playing tricks on him. But then he heard it. A faint thump from above, followed by a soft dragging sound, and then, undeniably, a creak that sounded exactly like the attic door opening. Elias stared at the padlocked door, his blood turning to ice. No, it couldn't be. He had locked it, he had padlocked it. The dragging sound grew louder, closer. It was coming down the stairs. Each thump was followed by a slide, then another thump. It was slow, deliberate. He could feel a cold draft emanating from the door. The distinct, sickly sweet smell of decay intensified. He could hear it breathing now. A shallow, wheezing sound like dry leaves being crushed. A sliver of light appeared under the door, a faint emerald glow. It pulsed rhythmically like a heartbeat. The thumping and dragging stopped directly outside the door. Silence, a heavy, suffocating silence. Then a faint, almost inaudible scratching began, directly on the other side of the wood. It was thin, persistent, like fingernails dragging across an old blackboard. Elias pressed himself against the opposite wall, his eyes wide with terror. He could feel the vibrations through the floorboards. The scratching stopped, and then a new sound, chillingly clear, reached his ears. A whisper, the same dry, ancient whisper from the attic. This time, however, it seemed to form words. He couldn't understand them, but the tone was malevolent, predatory. And then a low guttural chuckle that seemed to vibrate through the very air. Elias screamed. It was a raw animal sound, ripped from the deepest part of his being. He bolted. He didn't know where he was going, just away. Away from the whispering, away from the scratching, away from the emerald glow. He ran through the dilapidated farmhouse, through rooms filled with shadows that seemed to lengthen and twist into grotesque shapes. The old floorboards groaned and shrieked under his frantic footsteps, mirroring his own terror. He burst out the front door, slamming it shut behind him, and didn't stop running until he reached his truck, parked haphazardly on the overgrown driveway. He fumbled with the keys, his hands shaking so violently he could barely insert it into the ignition. The engine sputtered, then roared to life. Elias threw the truck into reverse, spinning gravel as he sped away from the house, not daring to look back. He drove for miles, the dark, winding country roads blurring past him. He didn't stop until the first rays of dawn painted the sky a bruised purple and orange. He pulled over on the shoulder of a deserted highway, his body trembling, his mind a chaotic mess of fear and disbelief. He tried to rationalize it. Sleep deprivation, stress, the creepy old house. It was just a doll, it had to be. He took out his phone, his thumb hovering over the numbers for the police. What would he say? "Officer, there's a haunted doll in my grandmother's attic that tried to come down the stairs." They'd think he was crazy. He spent the next few days in a cheap motel, barely sleeping, haunted by the image of those emerald eyes, the whispering, the dragging sound. He called a local real estate agent, told them to sell the house as is. He didn't care about the money anymore. He just wanted it gone. The agent, a cheery woman named Martha, called him a week later. "Mr. Thorne, I have some good news. A couple, serious antique collectors, are very interested in the house. They saw the online listing, particularly noted the description of the attic. They said they're looking for unique finds." Elias felt a cold dread creep over him. "The attic?" he asked, his voice hoarse. "Did you mention anything specific about the attic?" "Just that it's largely untouched, and there might be some valuable curiosities," Martha replied, oblivious. "They're very keen on something they call the Midnight Dancer. Do you know anything about that, Mr. Thorne?" Elias's blood ran cold. The Midnight Dancer. He hadn't told anyone about the doll. He hadn't even named it. "No," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "I don't know anything about that." He hung up, his mind reeling. How could they know? What was the Midnight Dancer? He remembered the intricate carvings on the doll's wooden body. He hadn't been able to decipher them. Now he felt an overwhelming urge to understand. He drove to the nearest public library, his hands still shaking as he typed search terms into an old computer. Haunted dolls, ancient puppets, folklore dark wood dolls. He found very little at first. Then, buried deep in an obscure digital archive of regional folklore, a single entry appeared. It was titled, "The Midnight Dancer of Thorn Valley." Elias clicked on it, his heart pounding. The article was old, digitized from a brittle newspaper clipping from the late 1800s. It spoke of a local legend, a grotesque, life-size doll carved from the wood of a lightning-struck oak, imbued with a malevolent spirit by a reclusive, grief-stricken doll-maker. The doll was said to move on its own, to lure people with whispers and promises, and to ultimately drain them of their life force, using their energy to animate itself further. It danced through the night, seeking new victims, its emerald eyes glowing in the darkness. It is said, the article concluded, that only a strong, unwavering will or a deep love for another can resist its silent call. Once awakened, it can never be truly put to rest. It always finds its way back to its keeper or someone who shares their bloodline eventually. Elias felt a wave of nausea wash over him. Keeper, bloodline, his grandmother had known. That's why she'd kept it locked away. Why she'd never spoken of it. He was a Thorne. It was his bloodline. He looked at the digital image accompanying the article. It was a crude drawing, but unmistakable. The long limbs, the small head, the chilling smile, the emerald eyes. It was the doll from his attic, the Midnight Dancer. A new kind of fear settled in him. Not just the fear of a monster, but the dread of an inescapable legacy. He had awakened it, and now it was coming for him. He closed the browser window, his mind racing. He had to warn Martha. He had to stop the sale. He had to tell them not to go near the house. But as he reached for his phone, a new thought, cold and insidious, crept into his mind. The article said it always finds its way back to its keeper, or someone who shares their bloodline. If he stopped the sale, if he left the house vacant, what would happen? Would it stay there, trapped in the attic? Or would it leave, following him, always drawing closer, step by agonizing step? He shivered. Perhaps if someone else, antique collectors no less, took it away, it would focus its attention on them. They were looking for unique finds. They were keen. They didn't share the bloodline. Maybe, just maybe, it would forget about him. It was a monstrous thought. A selfish, cowardly thought. But the terror that had gripped him was profound, primal. He couldn't go back to that house. He couldn't face that thing again. He put his phone away. He wouldn't call Martha. He wouldn't warn them. Days turned into a week. He heard nothing more from Martha. He tried to convince himself it was over, that the doll was someone else's problem now. He tried to move on. He got a job, found a small apartment, tried to forget the emerald eyes. But the dreams came. Vivid, terrifying dreams of the doll. It was always there in the periphery, its long, spindly limbs unfolding, its head tilting, its emerald eyes glowing. He'd wake up in a cold sweat, the dry whisper echoing in his ears. Then one night, he heard it, the faint thump and slide. He sat bolt upright in bed, his heart hammering. It was too clear, too real to be a dream. He crept out of bed, his apartment bathed in the faint glow of the city lights outside. He listened. Silence? He told himself it was his imagination. He was still traumatized. But then he heard it again, closer this time. The thump slide rhythm undeniably present, coming from the hallway outside his apartment. And with it, the sickly sweet scent of decay, faint but unmistakable. Elias backed away slowly towards the kitchen, towards the window. He could hear the low, guttural chuckle now just outside his door, the same ancient whisper. He looked at the window, a desperate escape route. He was on the 3rd floor. It was a long drop, but perhaps... The scratching started at his apartment door, thin, persistent, and then the unmistakable sound of something being wedged under the door. A sliver of emerald light appeared, growing brighter, pulsating. Elias knew it was hopeless. It had found him. He had betrayed his grandmother's legacy, his bloodline, by letting it go, by trying to pass it on. And now the midnight dancer had returned, not just to the house, but to him. He could hear the creak of the door slowly beginning to open. He closed his eyes, bracing himself. He knew he couldn't run anymore. The midnight dancer always found its way back. And this time it wouldn't be just a whisper. This time it would dance, and Elias would be its unwilling partner.